Bombshell, the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office opens the door for Aldama not to go to prison over the Coldo case. Let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to a new edition of Medidas Cautelares, a very important edition, extremely important because we have information that will be very relevant in the coming months. Pay close attention because the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office is opening the door for businessman Victor de Aldama not to go to prison. He could be convicted for the crimes he is going to be tried for, but not go to jail. All of this comes after his confession and his daily cooperation with the justice system. Of course, he deserves it. Let's share on screen, as we always do, this important information that we have in Medidas Cautelares. And of course, Pedro Sanchez won't like it at all, but too bad for him, with all due respect. Because if it hadn't been for Aldama, we wouldn't have gotten to where we are now. With all the investigations into the Coldo network and other corrupt schemes that of course are being cornered. Speaking of Pedro Sanchez's government, by the way, if you haven't done it yet, remember to subscribe to the Medidas Cautelares channel. And here you already have the information on the screen. Attention! The Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office has left the door open for businessman Victor de Aldama not to go to prison after his confession in the Coldo network. In its indictment, the prosecution requested 7 years in prison for Aldama after considering a mitigating factor for cooperating with justice. Compared to the 24 years in prison and 19.5 years respectively that were requested for the other two defendants, that is the former Minister of Transport, José Luis Ábalos, and his former advisor, Koldo Garcia. This Thursday, the Supreme Court held a preliminary hearing in which I was present regarding the trial of the first part of the case. Coldo, in which the parties presented to the court the preliminary issues and possible grounds for annulment. This was before the oral hearing, which is scheduled for the month of April. During his intervention, the chief anti-corruption prosecutor, Alejandro Luzón, referred to the possible reduction in the sentence request for Aldama in these terms. Luzón said verbatim at the hearing, "That reward, that lesser sentence, is the one that is imperatively established by the Penal Code in Article 21. The discussion may be about whether that cooperation is considered qualified or if it makes the mitigating circumstance highly qualified or not, but prior to the oral trial, I certainly think this was not appropriate." Legal sources consulted by Libertad Digital emphasize that the words of the chief anti-corruption prosecutor anticipate that the discussion will be whether Dama's cooperation with the justice system is considered a qualified or highly qualified mitigating circumstance. To determine this, the trial is held. In this way, Alejandro Luzón is opening the door to the possibility of a greater reduction of the sentence that the prosecution will request for the businessman. In its indictment, the prosecution demanded 4 years in prison for Aldama for the crime of criminal organization and another 3 years in prison for the continued offense of bribery. The Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office noted that Aldama benefited from the mitigating factor of confession as stated in Article 21, Section 4 of the Penal Code. For this reason, it set the minimum sentence established by law for both crimes without reducing it by even 1 degree yet. This fact is important. That is, it was requested by the prosecutor's office in its indictment. 4 years in prison for Aldama for criminal organization and another 3 years in prison for the continued offense of bribery. Was Aldama's cooperation with the justice system taken into account at that time? Yes, because he asked for the minimum for those crimes, but, and this is very relevant, the sentence has not yet been reduced by 1 or 2 degrees. This is what the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office will have to evaluate during the trial. That is, they go into the trial with the minimum sentence request for Aldama. For both crimes established by law, which are 4 and 3 years respectively, for criminal organization and continued offense of bribery. But that doesn't mean that the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office has already reduced the sentence request. This is what has to be settled during the trial, which will likely take place in April. The same sources consulted by Medidas Cautelares emphasize the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office must decide if Aldama's cooperation is a qualified mitigating factor, reducing the sentence request by 1 degree, or a highly qualified one, lowering the sentence request by up to 2 degrees. If the prosecutor's office reduces the sentence request by only 1 degree for the crimes of criminal organization and the continued bribery offense, neither of the 2 crimes would be punished with more than 2 years, and therefore Aldama would not go to prison. This also needs to be explained. That is, even if the two crimes separately added up to more than 4 years, since neither of the two crimes exceeds that amount individually. Exceeds 2 years, he would not go to prison. In other words, it doesn't matter if in the end Aldama was sentenced to 2 years for criminal organization and another 2 years for the continued bribery offense, totaling 4 years. Since neither of the two crimes separately exceeds 2 years, he would not go to prison, okay? But also, if the anti-corruption prosecutor's office reduced it by 2 degrees, considering that mitigating factor as highly qualified, it's possible that even the sum of both crimes wouldn't exceed 2 years. That is, if the mitigating factor is considered highly qualified, then the crime of continued bribery and of criminal organization, the total of both sentences might not even exceed 2 years in prison at any given time, okay? So, we can say that the truth is that Aldama is pretty close, let's put it that way, to not going to prison. The prosecution still has to wait for the oral hearing to make this decision, and finally, Aldama's statement remains just as forceful as it was during the investigation. At the end of the trial, Alejandro Luzon will have to request the final sentence for the businessman. It is also worth highlighting another important aspect. During this preliminary hearing, in which I was present at the Supreme Court, Aldama's lawyer, Jose Antonio Ochoa Choclan, announced that the businessman, during his statement, will answer all parties with complete transparency to avoid prejudicing anyone's defense rights. An important fact, Aldama is going all out during the trial. Ninguna indefensión. Lastly, the lawyer in the Aldama case has referred to a very important case, one that is covered under Article 574 of the Penal Code, which provides for, pay attention, the direct reduction of up to, it's a situation covered in Article 574 of the Penal Code, which is addressed in the preliminary hearing regarding the sentence, okay, for Aldama. This is exactly how it is stated in Article 574 of the Penal Code. It says that the judges or courts, as stated in Article 574 of the Penal Code, it says that the judges or courts may impose on the person responsible for any of the offenses provided for in this chapter a penalty lower by 1 or 2 degrees, as long as the individual has voluntarily abandoned their criminal activities and has actively cooperated with the authorities or their agents, either to obtain decisive evidence for the identification or capture of other responsible parties, or to prevent the actions or development of the organizations or groups to which they belonged, or to prevent the commission of a crime that was about to be committed within or through those organizations or groups. In other words, this Article 574 of the Penal Code is describing what Victor de Aldama has done, which means the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office still has another option, to directly invoke that article to reduce by up to 2 degrees the prison sentence it requests at the end of the trial for Victor de Aldama. It is, of course, very powerful information because certainly Aldama has, let's say within his reach, very close, the possibility of not going back to prison. You remember that he was arrested as part of the hydrocarbon scheme. He spent almost a month in pretrial detention, so he could be convicted for participation in a criminal organization and the continuing bribery offense, but he would not go to prison. He would not go to prison. That's it for this edition of Medidas Cautelares. I hope you enjoyed it and feel free to leave comments or opinions. What are your thoughts on Aldama? Well, I think that thanks to Aldama we've gotten to where we are, and it's worth forgiving his crimes if it brings down Pedro Sanchez, definitely. You can join as a chosen member for under €3 a month or as a supreme member for under €7 a month. You can also donate via Bizum at 627-556-370, 627-556-370, 627-556-370. The most important thing, as I always tell you, is that this information reaches everyone because information is power. See you soon.